Okay, we're back. It's COMP123, and it's week 10, lesson 10, part 1, and we're talking about assignment number 6. Okay, let's take a look at this thing. So if you haven't noticed, I'm kind of a mad scientist when it comes to building assignments, right? And I mean it by that, but I try and challenge you a little bit more every time, just a little bit more, building on all the skills that we have, right? So by the time it gets to when you come to programming 3, I want programming 3 for you to be easy, right? Once you go through mine, once you thread the needle in my course. Let's talk about assignment 6, and assignment 6 is up on eCentennial. So you can also take a look at it if you don't want to stare at it up here. I'll just wait till this loads. And I'll turn down the lights at the same time. It's just too bright for me. I'm going to do the other way around. How about that? That's better. Okay. Okay, so it's called sales bonus. And what you're going to build is going to look like this. It's a single form application that I want you to kind of build that's going to look something like this. Right? It's pretty simple. It's going to include a couple of labels. There's going to be some labels. There's also going to be some text fields, a few buttons, and something that says English and French, or Français. Let's take a look at this. So really, as an overview, it's worth, by the way, this assignment's worth 10% of your final mark. So it's a little bit heavier than the other ones that we've done before, for a couple reasons. One, I don't want to give you too many more assignments before the end, right? And two, this will give you an opportunity to really focus your skills on this one for a couple weeks. This one's due by April 3rd, so you get a couple weeks from now to do this one, right? So it's not going to be due in like a week or whatever. You get a couple weeks to fool around with the UI, get to know it, all that stuff. It'll help you for your final exam, which will include UI, your final exam, plus other classes and so on. So, and there'll be a practical piece as well as some kind of multiple choice thing for your exam. All right, let's take a look at this thing. So, the company has instituted a bonus program to give its employees an incentive to sell more. For every dollar the store makes in a 4-week period, the employees receive 2% of sales. The amount of bonus each employee receives is based on the percentage of hours he or she worked during the bonus period. Now, it's 2 weeks, which means the maximum hours an employee can put in is 160 hours. Does that make sense? Sorry, is that 4 weeks? 160 hours. 4 times 4. 40-hour weeks times 4 weeks. 40 is 160 hours, right? Okay, let's go through the details. Your Windows form application would include the following components, right? Add text fields. Now, this is has always been a point of contention with some people. They're like, what do you mean text fields? How many should I add? Well, I'm telling you here. Add text fields and associated labels, right? For the form to the form for employee name, employee ID, total hours worked, and total monthly sales. So that's what? 4 labels and 4 text fields is what I'm asking here, right? Okay, cool. And that's for 4 marks. And I kind of broke it down into functionality now and GUI because we're doing a bit of UI building now, right? So there's going to be some UI marks for actually doing what I'm asking you to do. Please don't omit anything or else you'll lose GUI marks. If you say, well, I don't need this, Tom. I'm not going to put this UI control on. Then you'll lose a mark. So please build it exactly like I'm telling you, all right? For a reason. When you go into industry and somebody asks you to build a form or a UI, there's no flexibility, guys. It's not like they give you, oh, be as creative as you want. It's not like that. You do what they tell you to do. If this is the designer, if you're in the project that you're building a UI for an app, and this could be like one form of an app that you're building, right? Then you're going to have a requirement to do it exactly like the customer wants. There's no flexibility. So I'm not going to accept flexibility here in terms of how creative you can be in, leaving stuff out. Don't leave things out. And don't add additional things that add no value either. Okay, the value of the total hours worked field cannot exceed 160 hours. So this is a functionality thing. Checking to see the form field that you're limiting it. If it's more than 160 hours, you get a kind of respond back to the user saying, meh, can't be more than 160 hours. And we'll figure out how to do that over the next week or so. Okay. Ensure that only the valid data can be entered in this field. In other words, no negative numbers. Again, this is a functionality thing, right? So you can't have weird data in this field. Add a text field and associated label to the form for a sales bonus. Ensure the read-only property for this field is set to true. Because if you look at the form, we'll go over the forms again. Each control has a set of properties, which I outlined last week. We're going to go over it again this week and kind of look through. One of the properties is read-only, right? So you can't write into that text field. That's all it does. It prevents you from doing any kind of writing into that text field, right? The total monthly sales text field should display a value using standard currency format. We'll talk about that, how to do that. Ensure that only valid data can be entered into the field. So again, field validation we're talking about here. Add a group box, and we haven't talked about group boxes, but we will today. Add a group box to the form and change the text property to display languages. So there's a text property for the group box. Kind of looks like this. There's a little text property. You can't see it here, but there's actually a group box here. And on the top there, it should say languages, not language. Okay, now we're going to add 2 radio buttons. And radio buttons are those little points, right? If you guys don't know what they are, you add them in there into the group box. And you want to ensure that the check property of the English radio button is set to true by default. Again, this is in design time. Remember we talked last week, just as a review, that there's 2 types of states we're talking about here. One of them is, runtime. In runtime, the only thing that runs in runtime is all of your events, the stuff that you've already pre-written in your code, and all that kind of stuff at runtime. At design time, you can set the properties and defaults of the controls as you like. You can kind of set out your UI the way you like. That's design time. Runtime is when we actually respond to any clicks or changes in any of the controls. Okay? So what we're saying here is at design time, I want you to set the check property of the English radio button to true. So it's set beforehand, before it actually goes and displays. So in design time. When the user selects the Française button, radio button, the text property of every label and button on the form will change to reflect their French counterpart. Okay, how do you do that? If statements, obviously. It's pretty simple. You're going to do if statements inside the form, so that to say that basically when the radio button changes, all the text properties of all the labels and buttons and all that stuff change. And you can store that in an array if you like. 2 different arrays. One English array for all the English properties, and one for the French labels. Right? That's the smart thing to do. Right? You could also, in other programs, we're talking about internationalization here. You might have more than one array. One for French, one for Spanish, one for English, and so on. And each one of those will hold the values for all those things. So that way, if you switch to a different language, it switches all the labels, which is a smart thing to do in this day's world. If the user switches the value, then what happens is, of course, that all the stuff back to English, it goes back to English, and you can go back and forth from English to French. Hint, hint. Okay, the French words sometimes are slightly bigger or slightly smaller than the English words, which means you should test thoroughly here, because what happens is you switch to French, and all of a sudden your UI is out. It doesn't work anymore. The labels are too big, too small. It's going to make the button they won't show all the words and the buttons, all that kind of stuff. You got to think about how to do that. So pre-size your buttons to fit all the words when you're switching back and forth beforehand. This is a design issue. Okay. Add a picture box to the form. Okay. Picture box is just another control. And create a simple logo. Now you can do this in any of your favorite programs. You're going to make a fictitious logo for the mail order company. With your favorite graphics program, whatever it is, Photoshop, Paint, Fireworks, GIMP, whatever. And display the logo in the picture box, and make sure the logo is properly visible, because in the picture box, you have to kind of put it in there. And I'll talk about that over the next, today and the next week or so, how to do these different controls. Now here's the challenge from a functionality perspective in this section. The calculate button will determine the sales bonus earned by this employee. The calculate button will only work if valid data is entered in the required text fields, which means if the required text fields don't have the proper data, you can click the calculate button all you want, and it should fire up some kind of error to the user saying, hey, you're missing something, kind of thing, right? or fix your validation, fix your data. And what you want to do is you want to take, when you click on this, the calculate button, it'll take the total hours worked, which should be in a text field, divide that by 60, and this will determine the percentage of hours worked during the bonus period. So for example, if the person out of 4 weeks, he only worked 1 week, it'll be 40 hours divided by 160, which is 25%, right? So this percentage will be used to calculate your total bonus, because you're only going to get a percentage of the bonus based on the number of hours you worked. Again, it's a little bit of calculation involved here. So it's a problem-solving exercise. So multiply the total monthly sales, whatever the total monthly sales is for the company, by 0.02. And this will calculate 2% of sales, which is the total bonus amount that's going to be shared across all employees based on how many hours they worked, right? Multiply the percentage of hours worked by the total bonus amount. So okay, I've got, let's in this scenario that I'm mentioning, I got 40 hours out of 160. That means I got 25%. And let's say I had $1,000 in total in sales bonus. That means I get 25% of $1,000, which is $250, right? And that's what will display in my sales bonus, right? So when you click that button, it doesn't just do one thing; it does a bunch of calculations, right? The next button, when you click the next button, will clear the text property for employee name, employee ID, total hours worked, sales bonus. It'll just clear. All it'll do is it'll clear the text fields, right? So it won't actually take you to another form. It'll just clear it. Almost make you feel like you're going to the next record. You're not really going to the next record. It's a trick, right? The amount of total monthly sales, though, once it's been entered the first time, cannot be cleared. So your next button doesn't clear that, because total monthly sales doesn't change. Once you know what the total monthly sales is, it stays the same for every employee, right? So you go to the next employee, you can add their data in there. Okay. And the last point is a print button. Now, we don't have print functionality typically, but there is a print preview that we're going to explore, how to kind of pop up a print preview. It's a special function that we're going to learn how to do, right? It doesn't actually print anything, and please do not use the print function. It's a print preview function that we're going to go over the next little while. It's a totally different thing. Okay, and all it does is you link it into the print button, and it's very, very simple. We'll go over this over the next week or so. Okay, so there's some components here that you haven't learned how to do, but we're going to talk about some of them today. But a lot of it is very basic event handling when you click buttons. That's all that's going to happen. You click a bunch of buttons, and then in the background, and we're talking about on the inside the code base for your forms, you have all the details in your code, right? So you have two views. Actually, there's for every form. We talked about this last week. Here's a review. We have two views. We have the design view, and we have the code view for each of the forms, right? So if you have multiple forms, right now you're only working with one. But if multiple forms in your document, each one of these forms has these two views, design view and the code view, right? Okay, I'm asking you to do some internal documentation. There is no external document for this assignment. Okay, so I'm not asking you to include an external document. After you get this, and by the way, there's no GitHub requirement for this one as well. Some of you had real issues with GitHub over this course, and I didn't mark you hard on it at all. And the reason for that is you gave me links to the commits, all kinds of weird things I got. Anyways, some of you didn't even hand in your assignments properly. You just gave me the GitHub link. Some of you didn't give me anything, right? Which is kind of weird, right? So going forward, if you're going to use GitHub, it's up to you. You can certainly submit a GitHub link. I don't tell you to do so here because I think some of you have been really confused around it, and I don't want to continue to confuse you. There's enough work here to be done, so I'm going to ease off on that requirement for now. Especially, but it's a good tool to use. I don't think GitHub's a bad tool to use. I think it's good from a tracking perspective, and versioning is how we should all start when we code. But anyways, that's another topic, and it's kind of a segue into what I'm going to talk about now, which is how we submit. The only thing I want you to submit, again, is your external document, and here it says external documents. Well, there is no external document for this one, so this is a null. I don't want you to put anything together here. Typically, if I have a submission, if there's any external document, it would be in Word or PDF. Some of you give me OpenOffice format, which is like, please don't do that. It's like ugly, right? And also, your Visual Studio project files should all be included. Sometimes I got like half a folder of files. I need your solution files. take that whole package, go swim to that location on your hard drive and take that whole folder, zip it up and give me everything. I don't want only part of the folder or the internal folder or one folder out of 5. That's bad, right? So if you're missing anything, check your marks. There's been some comments that I put in there that say nothing's been submitted or you forgot to submit this or whatever. And there's a couple of you that still hasn't received a mark for a couple of assignments, one here or one there, because you haven't submitted anything or the submission has been empty. I got an empty zip document, an empty archive. What can I do with that? Nothing, right? So it's a good idea to back up your zip document with a link to GitHub. I'm not going to make it a requirement though, but I think it's best practices. So if you want to learn best practices, keep doing your GitHub thing, but I'm not going to make it a requirement so you lose or gain marks. Okay? And I also put a simple rubric on the back end here, right, that basically tells you where your marks are coming from. So 17 marks for functionality, 18 marks for your UI building, 5 marks for internal documentation and readability, and I did leave some space for creativity here. Even though I told you to be very specific about what I've asked you to do, it doesn't mean that you can't. I didn't tell you anything about the form color. I didn't tell you, hey, make this form color red, blue, green, whatever. There's still some flexibility. I didn't tell you how big to make the form. I didn't say make this form 320 by 480. I didn't tell you that. I didn't say any of that stuff. So there's quite a bit of flexibility here for you to make your own adjustments. And this is where you can add in your own stuff. If you want to add functionality, because there's functionality that you think is missing, right, that's okay. I will accept additions, but I will not accept subtractions for what I'm asking you to do here, okay? But in the future, in real life, even additions are a no-no. You won't be able to add anything, even if you think in your, from your perspective that it makes sense. But if the user hasn't asked for it, typically there's something associated to that. There's a cost associated to every control you populate on a form in the long run. So unless specifically asked for it, or unless you check with your project manager or sponsor, coordinator, whatever, never add additional controls or don't take them away unless specifically asked to. And this is a real life skill, guys. If you can do UI building, there's a job in this, 100%, right? So the idea here is companies do it across the board. They always get you to build a UI to add on to an application or something like that, especially the banks. And Visual Studio and C#, as well as VB and F# are the platforms that they use. Okay. Any questions associated with this one? Please, no external code. This is all your own code. It's not really a lot anyway of coding involved. Although, if you notice, this mark split is about half. 17 marks for functionality, 18 marks for GUI, which means you literally, without any functionality at all, could pass by doing internal documentation and UI building, right? So if you just populate the form the way it's supposed to be populated and internally document your code, which means comments. That's what I mean by internal documentation. Comments, comments, comments. That makes sense. Don't over-comment either. That's bad. Then you can get like maximum marks would be 24 out of 40, which means you could pass with 0 functionality, right? So, I mean, it's not so bad. Any questions around this thing before we continue? I know it's a big one, and you're gonna look at this a little bit closely on your own. If you do have any questions or whatever over the next day or so, right, or even next week, come to me and we'll talk about it. The exam for next week will be a practical exam, just to mention that, and it'll be held on the Wednesday, so that's the 25th, right? The Tuesday we're going to do more review, so a review from the exam is going to happen on the Tuesday. The practical piece is going to happen on the Wednesday. It's only going to last an hour and a half, and it'll be purely UI building. Okay, so there won't be anything else on the exam except for UI. Okay, any questions? Okay, that's this section.